Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Red Car to Hollywood by Jennie Liu, narrated by Cindy Kay. A note on terminology. Throughout The Red Car to Hollywood, characters use the term Oriental to refer to things and people from the East, with Europe, where the term originated, being the reference point. This was the common terminology of the period, and characters in the novel use it as a neutral descriptive term, as would have been the convention then. Over time, the word has developed racist connotations. In 1968, a student activist group at the University of California, Berkeley, sought to unite different ethnic groups of Asian descent into one organization, the Asian American Political Alliance, and the terms Asian and Asian American took root as preferred broad labels. In recent years, the limitations and breadth of Asian American continue to be explored. The book's characters also use the terms Negro in reference to Black Americans and American Indian in reference to indigenous people and nations. Terminology has evolved since the 1920s and continues to do so. How people refer to themselves and how they prefer for others to refer to them can also vary from person to person. 1. Los Angeles, May 1924. I was being watched. I felt it, like the crackling static of a wireless. Someone at the end of the shelves, fidgeting and staring. A cold prickle went up the back of my neck, but I resisted the urge to turn around. Instead, I propped my elbow on the reading table and buttressed my fingertips against my forehead to obscure my face. I was hiding out, skipping school, trying to act like I belonged here in the Central Public Library in the middle of the day. A college student, maybe, studying art history and deeply immersed in Chinese art, Volume 2. But the prickles didn't go away. After a long minute, I closed the book and rose to return it to the shelf like any other ordinary patron. A page in an argyle vest and brown tweed pants stood by his cart, watching my every move. I turned the opposite direction, into the aisle along the wall, and slipped between the shelves to the spot where the book belonged. As I reached up to slide it beside Volume 1, a nasally voice startled me. "Hi." I spun around. Of course, it was the page. He had a messy thatch of brown hair and an Adam's apple as sharp as a teenager's, but he was at least 10 years older than me. He stood at the end of the aisle with his hands on his hips. His cart was nowhere in sight. "You're not supposed to reshelf books." His voice was friendly enough, but I regarded him warily as I lowered my arm. "Do you speak English?" he asked. Inwardly, I groaned. Would I be in the library poring over books if I didn't have English? Still, I tried to sound polite. "Yes?" He held out his hand for the book as he moved toward me. I took a step back, but passed the book to him. "I know exactly where I pulled it from." I pointed up to the empty slot above his head. "So I thought I'd just reshelve it myself." "Wow, you don't have an accent at all." He was all amazement, teeth showing yellow, eyes too eager. As he reached to put the book up, I turned to leave, hoping to slip away without any hassle. "Wait." He shoved the book in place, then moved closer to me. Too close. "What's your name?" My skin prickled again. "I really have to go," I said. "Wait a minute." His voice changed, dropping to a lower tone. "I saw you in here yesterday. You're not in any kind of trouble, are you?" His hand moved toward the cuff of my sleeve. I snatched my arm away. I didn't mean anything." His gaze wandered over me, taking in the length of my hair, then hovering for an instant at my chest, before he took up that low, hopeful note again. "It's just that you're such a pretty thing, with that china-white skin and black satiny hair." I backed away, glowering at him, until I came to the end of the shelf and then spun on my heel. I went down the stairs with my head down and slipped past the charging desk, which swarmed with patrons clutching books and slips of paper. The library was housed on the top floors of the Metropolitan Building, but I avoided the elevators and took the stairs down the 8 flights to ground level, ignoring the still raw blisters on my feet. After the marble and dark wood coolness of the library, I was caught off guard by the bright sun as I burst outside. The stillness of the warm May air struck me in a strange way. It was only a couple of days since the wind had died down. Devil winds, Mr. Liu called them. That fumbling page had unnerved me, just as much as the ceaseless tattering of branches and the gusting winds that had howled in my ears as I trudged across the city that night. Was it just 2 days ago? I squeezed my eyes to shut out the memory, then swept down the building's front steps. A brisk walk home would dispel the little pinpricks of unease at the edges of my mind. 5th Street wasn't nearly as busy as it had been in the morning, which oddly made me feel even more conspicuous on the sidewalk. With time to kill, I headed east, jigging my route so I could inspect different buildings and shop windows. I kept to the shade thrown by the store awnings, averting my eyes from the other pedestrians, but well aware of the glances thrown my way. Were they hostile? Leering? I hated that the question even popped into my head. Why did I have to duck in the shadows when all I wanted to do was stroll down the sidewalk with the sun beaming fully on my face? I wanted to plant myself in front of each plate glass window to study the displays of merchandise, like other girls did. But instead, with no more than fleeting glances, I scooted past polished wireless consoles, a flapper bride on the aisle of a faux church setting, and an Oldsmobile staged in the middle of a living room. I didn't stop because whenever I was outside Chinatown, I couldn't throw off that feeling that people were thinking, "What is she doing here?" After 6 or 7 blocks, the high-rise buildings became less imposing, less ornamental. The downtown flattened out to weedy lots strewn between plain brick and wooden clapboard buildings. Railroad tracks grooved and crosshatched the streets. When scents of frying oil and incense whiffed past me, I knew Chinatown was just the next block over. I passed under the narrow balconies clinging to the run-down tenements. Potted plants crowded some of them. Pink and golden bougainvillea unfurling over wooden rails painted red or black. By this time of day, everything, from the windows of the 2-story buildings to the red lanterns strung up for tourists, had been covered in the dust that somehow drifted in from the Mojave. Even the cabbages, radishes, and long green beans laid out on the vegetable carts were dusty, despite the sellers swiping them with cloths at regular intervals. I peered into the windows of the district's herbalists, general stores, and curio shops. Goods were crammed together with little eye for presentation. I couldn't help imagining how each business might make its wares more appealing. Feng Xion Company, the art and antiques emporium on Los Angeles Street, had the only storefront with any real visual appeal, in my opinion. When I reached our store, Chun's Art Emporium, I paused to check our own windows. Even though Ba had only taken over the shop a few months ago, I was as proud of it as if it had been in our family for generations. As soon as I glanced through the glass, I noticed Ma inside the shop. Her round face was drawn up tight. Ba paced past her, pinching the bridge of his nose under his glasses. My stomach twisted into a knot. I told myself, this might not even be about me. They might just be worried about the store. Business had been slow. Chinatown was just beginning to draw tourist traffic, but unfortunately, the shop wasn't on either of the 2 main arteries of the neighborhood. Before my brain could form another thought, Ma caught sight of me. She stared at me for a long time. Then Ba spun around, and from the cutting look he shot my way, I knew that I was found out. An impulse to run came over me, but I was frozen in place. Ba stormed to the door and yanked it open. He turned his face away as if I wasn't even there. I forced myself to step inside. When he slammed the door behind me, the building shook so hard that plaster dust sifted down from the ceiling. The knot inside me tightened as I moved to stand behind a tall yoke-back chair. Mrs. Chin stood off to the side, in front of a carved folding screen. She wasn't that old, but she always dressed in a no-fashion black smock dress that brushed her ankles. She was involved with the new Chinese Methodist Church, and she ran the Chinese mission school where young Chinatown kids went after regular school to learn to read and write Chinese. She was considered the moral authority of the community. When I nodded to her in greeting, she compressed her lips and looked at Ba. My head filled with a white glare of dread as I waited for Ba to speak. His jaw was so tense that the muscles of his neck popped out like cords. He stared down at the floorboards, his lean frame bent, with a fist propped up on a table as if he needed the support. We were several feet apart, but I could feel the anger radiating off him. Ma stood well back, leaning against a wardrobe, her eyes darting among the rest of us, with the pinch still between her brows. Mrs. Chin finally broke the strained silence and addressed me in Cantonese. I was just telling your parents that I had a very distressing visit from Mrs. William Blythe. Blood rushed to my face. It was worse than I thought. My hands curled around the slender wood of the chair's backrest. It seems that Mrs. Blythe is accusing you of... Mrs. Chen blinkered her eyes and cleared a catch in her throat. Well, she's accusing you of several things, including ensnaring her son Russell into a licentious relationship and destruction of property. Ma clamped her hand over her mouth. Ba closed his eyes and shook his head hard, as if to shut out the words. My brain hitched on the word ensnared. Ensnared? She made it sound like I was a crib girl calling out to men from behind a screen to draw them into a brothel. That was how the Blythes meant to paint me. It's not true. The blood in my head pounded against my temples. It isn't. He... The right word evaded my mind. Courted? Wooed? My knuckles were white from gripping the chair. It stuttered on its legs as I trembled. He pursued me! I was livid. Too livid to be embarrassed about saying such things to Ba and Ma. And irrationally, I wanted to make it clear that Russell had chased me instead of the other way around. They didn't care about that. I had associated with a boy. That was bad enough. But a white boy? Unheard of. And people, his parents and Mrs. Chen, had already begun to hear about it. A horrifying shame. Mrs. Chen puckered up her lips like she'd just tasted a sour plum. I could tell she didn't believe me. I opened my mouth to explain how Russell had waited for me that first day, but she stopped me cold. Mrs. Blythe is insisting on a payment of $400 for damages to the property. $400? That was more than a month's worth of earnings from the store. I turned to Ba. Ba, don't pay it. I didn't do anything. Ba closed his eyes. His nostrils flared wide. He wouldn't look at me. I didn't! Mrs. Chin's gaze darted between Ba and me. She was plainly appalled that a girl would speak to her father like this. Irene Blythe says she witnessed you and Russell in a... The words died in her mouth, apparently too mortifying to say aloud. Russell and I... Yes, we were... dating, I stammered, flustered again at the wrong-sounding word. A foreign word, a foreign idea, at least to Ba and Ma. Ma winced. Her other hand had made its way up to her face, and now both her hands mashed against her cheeks. Her eyes were bewildered, fixed on me as if she didn't know me. My parents and I didn't discuss personal things, about feelings. They'd both been born in the old country. That set us worlds apart. Ba rarely addressed me unless it had to do with work needing to be done for the store. But even Ma and I never talked about friends, boys, dating, especially white boys. I understood the unspoken rules of behavior. and the ones I broke, I knew to keep to myself. So of course I'd never mentioned a thing about Russell. But destruction of property? I set my jaw hard and shook my head in denial. No! No! Mrs. Chen laced her fingers and dropped her head. For a second, I thought she was going to pray. But then she said to Pa, "The Blythes don't want to press charges. They want to keep it quiet for everyone's best interest." Everyone's best interest. She didn't have to explain that. We all knew she meant that Mrs. Blythe didn't want it to come to the light of day that her son had mingled with a Chinese girl, and that Mrs. Chen didn't want to further stain the already blighted image of the Chinese, which she was fighting so hard to change with the Chinese Methodist Church. "I think it's best, too," she continued. "I don't have to tell you that it's important to control the damage to your family's reputation, and that of your business. What Ruby did or didn't do almost doesn't matter." She gave me a level look. "It's what you choose to do now that's at issue." My whole insides were crawling. I couldn't help but notice the deference Ba paid to Mrs. Chen by allowing her to speak, allowing her to advise him. Her esteemed position in the community, with the church, and as someone who could speak almost unaccented English, seemed to supersede her position as a woman. They've dug in, and their law is behind them. It's my advice that you do what you can to keep things quiet. I know it's a lot of money, but better to pay. Perhaps your clan association can help if you don't have the cash ready at hand. I believe the Blythe family will honor their promise to keep the matter private, so long as Ruby and the boy no longer see each other. But don't pay it. $400. I couldn't stand the amount. The business couldn't bear to lose that much. We don't see each other anymore. Quiet! Ba pounded the table beside him, juddering a celadon bowl displayed on it. Mrs. Chen and Ma both jumped. Ma clutched at the fabric of her house dress. For the next minute, Ba's breathing was the only sound in the room. He stared out the storefront windows. Finally, he straightened up, tugging at the hem of his waistcoat as he stepped toward the door. "I'll come see you tomorrow. We'll certainly sort this out before I leave for my buying trip later this month." Ba opened the door for Mrs. Chen. It was her cue to leave. After he closed the door behind her, Ba leaned his forehead against the glass. My breath was stuck in my throat. Now that Mrs. Chen was gone, I steeled myself for Ba's apoplectic rage. My impulse was to badger him not to pay, to plead, to argue, anything to fill up the awful silence and release the agitation building in me. But I kept quiet. Ba had never whipped me, but had also never done anything like this. A queasy feeling came over me. What if he demanded to know everything that had gone on between Russell and me? My ears turned hot. A beating would be easier to take. Ba's eyes finally lit on me. Another long moment passed. Then he grabbed the celadon bowl from the table and launched it across the room. Ma cried out, and I jumped as it crashed against the wall. "Get upstairs," Ba roared at me. "You go upstairs and you stay there." I crossed the room, hurrying toward our living quarters, my shoes crunching against the pale green shards. 2. March, 1924. The funny thing was that Mrs. Chen was the one who'd inadvertently connected Russell and me when she'd arranged my piano lessons with his sister Irene. We had moved to Los Angeles from San Francisco in late February, when Ba took a partnership with Mr. Lo. A couple of weeks after we settled in, Mrs. Chen visited Ma to invite us to the Chinese Methodist Church. Ma led her upstairs to our sitting room. Perched on our worn velveteen sofa, Mrs. Chen let her eyes wander over the altar table with the brass incense burner, the red scrolls that recorded our ancestors' names, Ba's rocking chair with the padded leather seat, and Ma's embroidery loom resting on a work table. I was more than a little proud of our mix of second-hand American furniture and marred Chinese pieces from the shop. Proud that Ba had been successful enough to move us beyond a single crowded room. When Mrs. Chen spotted our small piano and asked who played, Ma told her that I was self-taught. Mrs. Chen asked me to play for her, so I sat down and pounded out "Everyone Loves My Baby," or at least my best rendition of it. I'd heard the song often back in San Francisco at my friend Mary's place. Her family owned a big shirt factory and had a radiola. Mrs. Chen's mouth twitched. I couldn't tell what displeased her more, the loud, jazzy tune or the dropped notes from the broken or out-of-tune keys. She mentioned that the church was saving up for a piano and suggested that I learn to read music so that I could play at services. She had associations with another church, First Methodist, and knew of a girl from that congregation who gave lessons. Although the prospect of playing hymns in church didn't particularly excite me, I agreed, hoping at least I could make some friends that way. Our move to Los Angeles had been a big letdown. Chinatown in San Francisco had been like its own city. We'd rarely needed to venture beyond the 8 or 10 square blocks of the district, where we had our own churches, schools, theaters, stores of all kinds. I'd had friends I'd grown up with, gone to school with all my life. My friends and I, boys included, had sometimes slipped out in the evenings and gathered at the corner near the lamppost to gab. At least until the disapproving frowns of elders drove us home. But here in Los Angeles, the Chinatown quarter was much smaller. Many of the buildings were rickety and crumbling, with only 1 or 2 stories. The side streets were still unpaved, fading out to the barren, pebbly lots of a rail yard and a gas plant. Beyond those were the dirt roads and garden plots of the vegetable sellers who rattled by in the early mornings with their horses and carts. It was as if Ba had brought us to some remote outpost. There were far fewer kids my age here, so we didn't even have our own high school. I'd ended up at Polytech, a mostly white school, unlike my old school where everyone was Chinese. I'd only seen a couple of other Chinese students on campus, plus a few Japanese, Korean, and Mexican kids. No one was friendly. I moved around the halls feeling invisible. Only after I'd been enrolled a couple of weeks had we found out that most of the Chinatown kids went to Lincoln High. It boiled me up that we'd left all my friends for this. But of course, I couldn't say so to Ba. This move was bringing us closer to the life he'd always wanted. For years, he'd worked for others, saving and saving, hoping to start his own enterprise. And now he'd finally been able to buy into a store. It was a good store, too. Small, but well-stocked. Mr. Lowe was a mountain of information about ceramics and furniture. He seemed happy to answer my endless questions, chatting about everything from the various dynastic eras to the differences among vessel forms and the characteristics of certain hardwoods. The time I spent in the store, getting familiar with the wares, was always the most tolerable part of my day. The next Wednesday, I jumped on a yellow car to get to the First Methodist Church downtown. It had taken me a few weeks to figure out the streetcar system. The yellow cars ran all through central Los Angeles in an intricate network. And then there were red cars that went out beyond the city. In this one way, Los Angeles was more impressive than San Francisco. Irene, the piano teacher Mrs. Chen had recommended, turned out to be 22. Hardly a girl, and white. At first, I was guarded, seeing as how I'd been ignored and condescended to by the white girls at my new school. But Irene was puppy dog friendly. Right away, she pulled me onto the bench to sit next to her and started chattering to me. I was 2 or 3 lessons in when Russell showed up one afternoon. Irene and I were seated at the piano. She plinked out a hymn, naming each note as she played. This, she said, would cement them in my head. I nodded along at each tap of the keys, though inwardly I sighed, wondering why I needed to know the names of the notes. It seemed easier to run my fingers up and down the keys, following the rise and fall of the notes on the page. I caught sight of Russell, leaning against a doorframe on the side of the sanctuary. He wore a gray belted suit and held a large picnic basket with both hands. Irene had mentioned that she had a date with her fiancé following the lesson. a sunset picnic in the hills, and that her brother was to bring the food sent by their mother. I dipped my head, and may not have taken any more notice of him, except that his eyes fixed on me in the most intense way, and a smile played on his lips. He nodded back, and the light streaming in from the stained glass window glinted gold on his slicked back tawny hair. I was suddenly conscious that my own locks were splayed messily down my back, but I resisted the urge to gather them and rake them smooth. I turned back to the sheet music. Irene completed her demonstration, then spotted her brother. "Russell!" She jumped up, her coppery curls bouncing, and ran over to take the basket. Thank you. You're a doll. Let's see what Mama packed for me." "Well, what Lucille packed for you anyway," Russell said. Irene wrinkled her nose at being corrected. "Lucille's our housekeeper and cook," she explained to me. She flipped the lid up and went into raptures about the fried chicken and potato salad. "I guess I'll start for home." I stood up and edged out from the bench. "But we still have 15 minutes, Irene said. "Pierre won't be coming by before then anyway. Let me just put this over here." She set the picnic hamper on a pew and urged me to sit down. I started playing and tried to concentrate on reading the notes aloud as I struck the keys. From the corner of my eye, I saw that Russell watched me for another minute before he slipped out the door. 20 minutes later, I exited the church. 2 huge eucalyptus trees scented the air and cast shade against the flat blue sky. I hadn't gone but a few yards past the scrolled iron gates when I noticed Russell half a block ahead. He leaned against a black Ford Model T with his ankles crossed. Our eyes met, and he straightened up. I almost stopped in my tracks as the realization sprang to my mind. He was waiting for me. I recovered my step, hoping he hadn't noticed the hesitation. As I neared him, he moved into the center of the sidewalk. "Hi," he said. I had to stop then. "All done in there?" I inclined my head. "I'm Russell Blythe, by the way. My rude sister didn't introduce us." "Rude? I think she's awfully nice. I'm Ruby Chun." "You go to Polytech High, don't you? I've seen you on campus." He'd noticed me. I couldn't keep the surprise off my face. Polytech was huge compared to my school in San Francisco. "I'm a junior." "Senior here," Russell said. "You're new this year." I nodded again. An awkward silence fell between us, which was strange. I wasn't usually shy. In the store, I prided myself on being able to talk up a customer until I figured out what they liked and what they didn't know they needed. But Russell was no lady browsing vases for her mantle, and I wasn't used to this kind of attention from a boy. A white boy. Russell didn't seem uncomfortable, but the way he looked at me made the backs of my knees soft. "Well, listen," I said, one side of my mouth turning up into a smile. "I've got to catch my streetcar." "Where are you going? Home? I can give you a ride. You live in Chinatown?" "Yes," I answered, but then quickly added, yes, I live in Chinatown, but no, I don't need a ride." Ba would be more than shocked if I rode up in a vehicle with a boy. Any boy. And a white one would be unthinkable. "I have to hurry. I see the streetcar coming. Nice meeting you." "Nice meeting you," Russell echoed as I passed him. I felt his eyes on me as I moved down the sidewalk toward the yellow car stop. I tried to walk normally, despite the thrill that ran down my spine. On the streetcar, I sank into a seat. A young boy wearing a newsboy cap twisted around and stared at me with an unsmiling look. I turned away. The windows weren't glassed in at the rear of the streetcar, and the wind cooled my face as we screeched and clanged through streets teeming with motor cars and pedestrians. The buildings rolled by as I pulled my hair around and combed my fingers through it, wondering at the peculiar little encounter with Russell. I can't say I didn't like the way he looked at me. Everything suddenly felt different. A persistent beep, beep, beep rose over the rattle of traffic. I leaned out the window and scanned the congested street behind us. Vehicles swerved around each other and around the streetcars that ran down the center of the road.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?